What's up, Austin here, and if you recall, I was not the biggest fan of the S5. If you want to see that review, the link will be in the description, but I didn't really feel like they did enough to make the phone stand out or really make any improvements over the previous generation. Well, this year they did. The Galaxy S6 and the Galaxy S6 Edge, I think, are the best Android phones you can buy right now. So let me just get started by saying that these are the exact same phone. It's just that one has a curved screen and a slightly bigger battery, but that's about it. I considered doing two reviews, but I just couldn't find enough differences between the two to really warrant that. I know some other reviewers are probably going to hype up the curved screen, but in my honest opinion, there just isn't enough to actually set it apart from the Galaxy S6. But we'll talk about that later. On to the review. These are the best phones Samsung has ever made. You can tell that right when you pick them up. And yes, they are reminiscent of the iPhone, but at this point, who the hell cares? It's a beautiful combination of glass and metal. Again, you can feel the build quality right when you pick up the phone. It's really stunning. Both the front and the back of the devices are completely covered in Gorilla Glass 4, and the edges are metal. I particularly like the regular S6. It's comfortable to hold. A problem that I had with another similar phone was that the sides were just too rounded and the phone was too slippery. Well, here they flatten out the edges on the side, and it makes the world of a difference. Also, all of the ports and buttons are laid out in the perfect position. The power button is the right height, and all the buttons have a super tactile click and response to them. My only complaint is on the Edge variant. Because of the curved screen, there's just not a lot of room for an actual edge, so there isn't much for you to hold on to. Honestly, it felt super uncomfortable when I first picked it up, and while I've gotten used to it by now, I much still prefer the grip of the regular S6. There are a couple things to note here though. In order to get this beautiful design, Samsung had to make some trade-offs. And in particular, they got rid of two things that Samsung has really been known for, at least in the phone market, and that is expandable storage through SD card and removable batteries. If you're a person that needs to have a micro SD, you might want to look elsewhere, but personally, I would trade expansion for this design on any day of the week. So the first thing you'll notice about the phone when you turn it on is just how beautiful the display is. It's one of the best I've seen. It's 5.1 inches, Quad HD, and Super AMOLED. As expected, it has vibrant colors and it's super sharp. There are some color options to tweak the saturation and contrast, but I was happy with the default setting. Honestly, there's not much to say here except that the display is really, really good. The only downside, of course, is that battery life takes a huge hit. In fact, there's a smaller battery in both of these phones than there was in the S5. I'm not sure the trade-off was worth it, considering the S5 also had a really good display, but they should have included at least the same battery capacity if they wanted to push a lot more pixels. Of course, I have to talk about the Edge. I think the curved screen looks cool and feels cool when you're swiping in from the sides, but it doesn't really offer any new functionality. Like I mentioned in my previous video, you basically get the same features as the Note Edge. The only real notable one is that if one of your favorite contacts calls you, the edge of the screen will light up a certain color depending on which contact it is. The only thing is, I don't know anyone that keeps their phone face down lying right on the screen. I mean, really. Plus, for some reason, it only lights up on one side, which I find pretty stupid. The curved screen is nice, and you can decide for yourself whether or not it's worth the $100, but it doesn't offer much in terms of functionality. I'm not saying it's a gimmick or anything, but right below the display is the fingerprint reader, and it is a million times better than the one on the S5. Quite frankly, I hated the one on the S5. You had to swipe across the home button, which was weird considering how big the phone was, and it wasn't as accurate. Well, it's much better now. All you have to do is place your finger on the home button, and it recognizes you pretty quickly. I don't think it's as fast as Touch ID, but it's fast enough for it to work comfortably. In fact, I think the only thing slowing it down is the animation itself and not the actual performance of the phone or the sensor. Speaking of sensors, the S6 has a gigantic protruding 16 megapixel camera on the back, and it's amazing. I know I might piss off some people by saying this, but the camera on the S6 is just as good, if not better, than the cameras on the iPhone. It just takes really, really good photos. It has optical image stabilization, records in 4K, and it's fast, and not just in terms of aperture. It does have an f1.9 aperture, which is better than the iPhone's f2.2, but it's also quick. You can double tap the home button to bring up the camera almost instantaneously, and the camera's just ready to take a picture. And it's not hit or miss, which is great. It's awesome to know that if you're taking a picture really quickly, you're gonna get it right the first time. It's probably the best part about the phone, which is saying something considering everything else that the phone does right. There's also a 5 megapixel camera on the front that also takes really good pictures. And this is like super important to me because I take a lot of selfies on Snapchat and they finally don't look crappy. It's super wide, so you'll obviously get some distortion if you're too close to the camera, but other than that, it's really nice to have that wide view. I'm pretty sure this is the best front-facing camera I've used too. So let's talk about the performance. It's fast. Both of the phones have an octa-core processor, which is insane for a phone, but like you'd expect, they perform really well. Of course, no phone is perfect. I've had apps crash and the occasional stutter, but overall, it's a really smooth experience. The main story is really in the software. I don't know if I've just gotten tired of complaining about TouchWiz all the time, but it doesn't seem that bad anymore. It still comes with some bloatware, especially the Verizon version, but they put most of them into folders right out the box and make them pretty easy to disable or just uninstall. There are some Samsung specific apps, of course. For example, there's a place that you can download different themes, but I didn't really like any of them or find them useful. A feature that some people might find more useful is the split screen view. If you double tap the multitasking button, you can open two apps side by side and use them at the same time. They've included this feature in other phones, but I didn't find it particularly useful considering the smaller screen size. But it's there if you want it. I mean, overall, the software experience is a little bit better than the S5, but mostly the same. The one thing that they did change, though, is battery life. And unfortunately, it's not that good. You can get through the day, but only barely sometimes. I mean, if you really use the apps on your phone, you're going to be panicking by the time it hits like 6 or 7 o'clock and you're on 15 or 20% trying to get through the rest of the night. I mean, it can last all day, but you have to be pretty careful the way that you use it. I mean, this is what happens when you include a smaller battery, but then you include two 4-core processors and a QHD screen in such a small package. I know it's a compromise that they made, but honestly, I would have just rather they put in a 1080p screen or just made the phone a little bit thicker, because I'm not sure that this particular trade-off is really worth it. Luckily, these phones do have quick charging enabled, so you can charge it really quickly on the go, but it only works if you have a specific fast charger. There's also wireless charging, which is a pretty nice feature, but it's slower than regular charging. Overall, the battery was the only subpar aspect of the phone. These phones are great in every single way except for battery. I would still highly recommend them, but the battery life is going to be something you're going to have to keep in mind if you're considering purchasing either of these phones. As far as whether or not to get the curved version or the regular version, I would just suggest going into a store and holding each of them side by side and seeing if the curved screen is really worth the extra price. If you do go for the Edge, just keep in mind that you're not going to get any extra new features with the cool screen. It just looks cool. So that about wraps up this review. I honestly think that these are the best two Android phones that money can buy right now. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Be sure to hit that thumbs up button if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you haven't already to catch all of my latest videos. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.